The morning of my husband's promotion party, I was on my knees scrubbing the grout between the kitchen tiles, not because anyone asked me to, not because anyone would notice, but because that's what I did. I made things clean so other people could walk across them without thinking twice. My name is Nora. I was 31 years old, and I had spent the last 6 years learning to take up less space. The party was set for 7. I'd been up since 5:30, which wasn't unusual. I liked the early hours. The house still mine, the silence unbroken. The coffee I made exactly the way I wanted it without someone remarking that I used too much cream. I stood at the kitchen window with my mug and looked out at the backyard, at the string lights I'd hung the evening before, at the folding tables draped in linen I'd ironed myself, at the centerpieces I'd assembled from eucalyptus and white ranunculus, because my husband's mother had once mentioned. 3 years ago, that eucalyptus looked elegant without trying too hard. I remember details like that. It was one of the things I was good at. His name was my husband. That's what he was to me then. A title. A role I'd been assigned and had accepted, the way you accept a job description, without reading the fine print. We'd met when I was 24 and he was 32. He was a senior account director at a tech consulting firm, and I was working as an event coordinator for a hotel downtown. He told me I had an exceptional eye for detail. He said it like it was a compliment. I believed him. We were married 11 months after we met. Fast, I know, but he was certain, and his certainty felt like safety. I'd grown up in a house where nothing was certain. My father between jobs, my mother between moods. So when someone stood in front of me and said, "I want to build something with you," I said yes before the sentence finished. I left my job at the hotel 6 months into our marriage. His idea, but I agreed. He traveled frequently for work, and we talked about starting a family, and he made enough that my salary felt, in his words, more symbolic than practical. I told myself I'd freelance. Pick up small events on the side. Keep my hand in. I never did. There was always something else. The house, the dinners, the dry cleaning, the research into whatever new thing he was interested in that month. Wine regions, fly fishing, the history of Byzantine architecture. I became very knowledgeable about a lot of things I'd never cared about. I became someone whose entire interior life was arranged around someone else's preferences. 6 years. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because I spent a long time not seeing it clearly, and I think the only honest way to tell this story is to start from the ground up. The guest list for the party was 43 people. I know because I built it myself, cross-referenced the office contacts he sent me with the personal friends he wanted included, handled every RSVP, organized the dietary restrictions into a spreadsheet. I'd hired a caterer for the main dishes, but I'd made 6 of the appetizers myself because my husband thought it was a nice touch when the hosts contributed something homemade. I made mini beef Wellingtons and individual pastry cups. I'd practiced them twice that week. At 4 in the afternoon, he came home and walked through the backyard where I was doing a final check on the tables. He looked around, nodded once. "The flowers are a bit much," he said. "Not it looks beautiful." "Not thank you for doing all of this. Just, the flowers are a bit much." "Your mother likes eucalyptus," I said. "It's not her party." He went back inside. I stood there for a moment with my clipboard and my checklist. Then I straightened the nearest centerpiece, not because it needed it, and kept going. His coworkers started arriving at 7. I changed into a forest green dress, put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our anniversary 2 years ago. I did my own hair. I opened the door, smiled, handed people drinks, showed them to the backyard. His assistant, a young woman named Cassidy, arrived early and told me the decorations were gorgeous. "You did all this yourself," she said. "Most of it," I said. "Wow." She looked around with genuine appreciation. "You should do this professionally." I laughed, the way I'd learned to laugh at things that had once been true. By 8:30, the party was full and loud in the good way. The catering team was doing well. The beef Wellingtons were gone in under 20 minutes. I watched the empty platter get carried back to the kitchen and felt a small, quiet satisfaction. His boss, a tall man named Gerald who I'd met 3 times and who had never once remembered my name, was laughing loudly near the bar. My husband was at his side, animated, easy. He was good in rooms like this. He always had been. I was refilling the water pitchers on the far table when I heard the conversation shift. Gerald said something about the promotion, about how it came with new expectations, and my husband laughed and said something I didn't catch. Then Gerald gestured toward me. Gestured because he still didn't know my name, and said, "Is this the wife? What does she do?" I turned around. My husband looked at me. Not with warmth, not with the look of someone about to introduce their partner, with something I can only describe as the faintest trace of inconvenience. "She manages the house," he said. Gerald nodded slowly, the way people nod when they want to move on. "She keeps things running," my husband added, and then, I want to be precise here because I have replayed this sentence many times, he smiled at Gerald and said, "Honestly, I don't think she could manage much else. She never finished her degree, you know. Smart enough for the house, maybe, but not exactly what you'd call ambitious." The words landed like something dropped from a height. Around me, I was aware of conversations continuing, glasses being refilled, someone near the fence laughing. The world kept going. But I stood very still, the water pitcher in my hand, and I felt the precise, specific shame of being dismissed in front of 43 people by the person who was supposed to know you best. Gerald made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a response. He moved on. My husband turned back to the circle. I set the water pitcher down on the table. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I had cried plenty in the years before this. In bathrooms, in my car, into pillowcases in the middle of the night. I was done with that particular response. Instead, I thought, with startling calm, I need to call my sister. Her name was Faye, my older sister by 4 years, who lived 40 minutes away, who had been quietly worried about my marriage for at least 3 of those 6 years, but who had respected my boundaries enough not to say so unless I opened the door. She answered on the second ring. I went inside and stood in the walk-in closet with the door shut and told her what had just happened. There was a silence on her end. Then she said, "Come here when the party's over. Just come. It's a 45-minute drive. Nora." Her voice was steady. "Come." I went back out and finished the party. I smiled. I refilled things. I thanked people for coming. I watched my husband accept congratulations, watched him be charming and easy and well-regarded. Watched the version of himself that he showed the world. The version I believed in once. When the last guest left, he went upstairs without helping clean up. The catering team was packing their equipment. I stood in the backyard among the guttering string lights and the half-empty glasses and the eucalyptus centerpieces, and I thought, I have been here before. I have always been right here. I packed a bag while he showered. Not a dramatic bag, not an everything I own bag. A few days' worth. My laptop. A folder I'd been keeping in the back of a filing cabinet in the home office, tucked behind the warranty documents for the refrigerator. I'd started the folder 8 months ago. That requires some explanation. About 8 months before the promotion party, I'd run into someone at the library. This is not a romantic subplot, I want to say that clearly. His name was Aldous, and he was 63 years old, and he was a retired attorney who volunteered 3 mornings a week helping people file paperwork for various legal processes. I'd been there to return books, and I'd noticed a display near the reference desk about a local continuing education program, and I'd stood there reading it for perhaps too long, because Aldous had come to stand beside me and said, "They do good work." "You thinking about going back?" I said I hadn't thought about it in a while. He said, "You should think about it, not pushy. Just matter of fact." The way people talk when they've seen enough of life to know that later often means never. I went home and thought about it. Specifically, I thought about what it would mean to have a credential that was mine. Not the house, which was in his name on the original mortgage. Not the car, which he'd leased. Not the social life, which was really his social life, his colleagues, his mother's friends, his world into which I had been folded and smoothed flat. Mine. I looked up the program. It was an accelerated certification in hospitality and event management, a field I'd worked in, knew well, had walked away from at someone else's request. The coursework was online. The certification was legitimate. It took 8 months. I enrolled the following week. I told no one. Not my sister, not my mother, Not any of the friends who were, in retrospect, more his friends than mine. I did the coursework during the hours when my husband traveled, or golfed, or attended the various after-work events he attended without inviting me. I took my exams in the library, in the coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over, once in my car in a parking garage because there was no other quiet place available. I finished 4 weeks before the promotion party. The folder in the filing cabinet behind the refrigerator warranty contained my course completion certificate. It also contained a printed email, an offer letter actually, from a boutique event planning firm whose founder had been my client at the hotel downtown 8 years ago, who had reached out through a mutual contact after I'd quietly let it be known that I was looking. The offer was real. I'd not yet signed it. I'd been trying to figure out how to have the conversation, how to explain to my husband that I'd spent 8 months rebuilding something without telling him, and that I wanted to go back to work, and that I needed the situation to change because it had not been working, not for a long time. Standing in the backyard after his party, I understood that there was no conversation to be had. There was only a decision, which I had in some ways already made. I left while he was still in the shower. I didn't leave a note. I left the lights off and the back door locked, and drove 40 minutes to my sister's apartment, where she had tea already made and didn't ask me a single question until I had finished 2 cups and a piece of toast. Then she said, "How long have you been thinking about this?" 8 months, I said. Seriously, but longer, I think, if I'm honest. She nodded. "What do you have?" I put the folder on her kitchen table. She read through everything quietly, the certificate, the offer letter, the notes I'd made, because I was always making notes, always preparing. It was the thing I couldn't turn off, the budget I'd build out for what a transition would look like, the savings I'd been quietly accumulating in an account I'd opened in my own name, 1 direct deposit at a time from the household allowance he gave me every month. When she finished reading, she looked up at me and her eyes were bright. "Nora," she said, "when did you do all of this?" "Between the hours of 8 and 11 a.m., mostly," I said, "while he was at golf." She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that's also something else, relief maybe, or the release of something long held. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "You planned your entire escape while he was playing golf," she said. "I wasn't escaping," I said, and then I thought about it. Actually, yes, that's exactly what I was doing. I signed the offer letter for my sister's apartment at her kitchen table at 11:47 that night. The firm was called Alderton and Crane. My old client's name was Dale, and he'd started the company 6 years ago, which was, I noticed this with something like dark humor, exactly as long as I'd been married. We'd spoken twice by phone over the past month and a half, and he'd been direct. The position was a coordinator role, but with room to move. The team was small and good, and they were expanding into the corporate event space where my background was directly relevant. "You're overqualified for the title," he'd said during our second call, "but you'll grow into the role you actually want within a year, I'd estimate. If you're as good as I remember." I told him I was, possibly, better. He laughed. "Good. That's what I wanted to hear." Sitting at my sister's table with her borrowed pen, I was aware of something unfamiliar moving through me. Not happiness, exactly. That felt too simple for the moment. More like orientation, like finding north after a long time of walking in the wrong direction without a compass. My husband called twice that night. I didn't answer. He called 4 times the next day. On the third call, I answered, mostly because I wanted the facts to be spoken clearly rather than assumed. He was angry, at first, then confused. He said I was being dramatic. He said the comment at the party had been a joke, that Gerald had a similar sense of humor, that I'd misread the tone. He said I'd embarrassed him by leaving. He said he didn't understand what he had done. I let him finish. Then I said, "I've accepted a job offer. I'm moving forward. I'd like to handle the next steps calmly and respectfully, and I think we should get lawyers involved sooner rather than later so there's no confusion about what that looks like." There was a silence. "You accepted a job offer," he said. "When?" "Last night." "You don't have—" He stopped. "You haven't worked in 6 years." "I know," I said. "I also have a certification in hospitality and event management that I completed last month. I've been working toward this for a while." Another silence. "Longer this time?" "You did this behind my back," he said. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the word behind, the implication that I had been sneaking, hiding, betraying something. I thought about the 8 months of early mornings in parking garages and borrowed quiet. I thought about 43 people standing in a backyard that I had built with my own hands, while my husband told his boss I wasn't ambitious. I did this for myself, I said, which is something I should have done much sooner. I hung up. My hands were steady. The separation was not clean or simple. Nothing real ever is. There were hard weeks, and there were phone calls I dreaded, and there was a conversation with his mother that I had not anticipated, and that was, in its own way, worse than the party. There were mutual friends who went quiet, which told me something true about whose friends they had really been. There was an apartment I found on my own, a third-floor place with big windows and a radiator that ticked in the mornings like a patient old clock. There was furniture I chose without consulting anyone. And there was the job. The job was hard, and then it was good. The team was small, 6 people, including Dale, who ran things with the kind of calm, structured authority that I'd once associated with my husband and now recognized as something entirely different, competence paired with respect. My first solo project was a corporate retreat for a biotech company, 80 attendees, 2-day format. I built the run-of-show spreadsheet the way I always had, detailed, cross-referenced contingency plan to the edge of obsession. Dale reviewed it and said, without much ceremony, "This is excellent work." I heard those 4 words and felt something that my body didn't quite know what to do with. It was different from my husband's occasional approval, which always came wrapped in the implication that I should be grateful for the assessment. This was just accurate. A statement of fact between 2 professionals. I said thank you. I got back to work. 7 months into the new job, I ran a gala for a nonprofit that worked with first-generation college students. 500 people, black tie, live auction, the whole production, my biggest event since leaving the hotel 8 years earlier. I'd been awake by 5:30 the day of, old habits, going through my checklist, adjusting, confirming. Faye came as my +1. She wore a blue dress and kept pace with me all evening, and at one point very late when the auction was over and the dancing had started and the room looked the way I'd spent 3 months making sure it would look. She caught my arm and turned me to face the space. "Look at this," she said. "I know," I said. "The floral install on the left is slightly off from what the rendering showed. I need to talk to the vendor about Nora." She squeezed my arm. "Look at what you made." I looked at what you made. I looked. 500 people in a room filled with warmth and intention, every detail placed with care, the room doing exactly what a room is supposed to do, disappearing into the background, letting the people in it feel something. That's the job, actually. You work that hard so that no one notices the work, so that it feels effortless to everyone inside it. For a long time, I'd done that for a life that wasn't mine. Now I was doing it for something that was. I didn't cry. I was done with that particular response, remember? But I held onto my sister's arm for a long moment and let the room do what I'd built it to do. Sometime later, I was having coffee with Aldous, the retired attorney from the library, who had become, in the way of unexpected things, a genuine friend. We met occasionally at the coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over, the same one where I'd once taken exams in secret, and we talked about whatever seemed worth talking about. I told him about the gala. He listened, nodded once, and said, "What are you working on next?" Not "I told you so." Not "look how far you've come." Just, "What's next?" I thought about it. "I want to eventually run my own firm," I said. Mid-size. Focused on nonprofits and corporate clients who want something that doesn't feel corporate. There's a gap in that market. Aldous sipped his coffee. "You have a timeline?" 3 years, I said. "Maybe 2.5. He nodded again. "Seems right." That was it. That was the whole conversation about it. And somehow that was better, more sustaining than any bigger response could have been, because it assumed, without ceremony, that I would do what I said, that the goal was real, that I was the kind of person who finished what she started. I was 32 years old. I was sitting in a coffee shop 2 neighborhoods from where I used to live, with a woman's coffee order on my receipt, because I had learned to get exactly what I wanted without overthinking it. I had a job I'd built from 8 months of secret mornings. I had a folder in a cabinet in my own apartment that held the beginning of a business plan I was adding to every week. I had, it turned out, been building things all along. I'd just been building them in the wrong direction for a while. That happens, and then it stops happening if you decide. I decided. I've thought a lot about the word invisible since that night. Not invisible like no one can see you. Invisible like you've been standing in the same room for so long that people stop registering you as a person and start seeing you as furniture, something that holds things up, something that makes the space function, something no one thinks to think. That was me for 6 years. And the strange part, the part I've had to sit with honestly, is that I let it happen. Not because I was weak, not because I didn't know better, but because I believed, somewhere underneath everything, that keeping the peace was the same thing as being good. That shrinking was a form of love. It isn't. What my husband said at that party, in front of his colleagues, in front of people I'd fed and welcomed into a space I'd built from scratch, was cruel. But it was also clarifying in a way that nothing else had managed to be in 6 years of smaller, quieter diminishments. Sometimes people reveal themselves completely in a single sentence. And when that happens, the only honest response is to believe them. I believed him, and then I left. But here's what I want to say about Aldous, because I think about him more than people might expect. He was a 63-year-old retired attorney I met in a library. He didn't rescue me. He didn't give me anything I didn't already have. He just looked at a display about continuing education and said casually, "You should think about it," and then walked away. That was it. That was the whole intervention. What followed was mine. 8 months of early mornings and parking garages, and a folder behind the refrigerator warranty that held the evidence of who I actually was, underneath everything I'd agreed to be. Nobody gave me that. I built it in the margins of a life that hadn't left me many margins. That's the thing about intelligence. Real intelligence. Not the kind you perform at dinner parties. Not the kind that gets praised on resumes, is quiet and patient and cumulative. It shows up in the small daily decisions to keep going, to keep learning, to not let the version of yourself that someone else decided on become the only version available. And Faye, my sister, who made tea without asking and didn't say a word until I'd had 2 cups, who read through my entire folder at her kitchen table at midnight without once saying "I told you so," who looked at the offer letter and said simply, "When did you do all of this? That's what real support looks like." It doesn't make noise about itself. It just shows up and holds the space while you find your footing. I'm 32. I have an apartment with big windows and a radiator that ticks in the mornings. I have a job I built in secret during the hours my husband spent on a golf course. I have a business plan I'm adding to every week. None of it arrived because the universe balanced some invisible ledger. It arrived because I decided, slowly, then all at once, that I was worth the effort of my own ambition. What we allow, we teach. What we build quietly, we eventually get to keep. I decided to build something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's opinion of me. That's the whole story, really.